Leader of the Opposition.
After the summer, the Liberals had, even the Prime Minister must admit that he's not worth the cost, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years of promising to reduce the cost of housing, it has doubled. And he said it's not his job. And finally, he panicked because of lower support in polls. He's recycled the same promises he broke over 6 years ago. It took 8 years to cause housing hell by the Prime Minister. How long will it take to resolve this? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know that Canadians are feeling the rise in prices throughout the country, especially at the grocery store and for housing. That's why we are taking immediate action to build more housing by eliminating GST, by supporting small businesses and extending repayment, and by calling in food CEOs for a meeting today to ensure we reduce the cost of food. Our priority is to build an economy focused on the well-being of all Canadians, and that is what we will do every day in this House. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. People can't have well-being when they're living in tents. After 8 years, the cost of housing has doubled, and now interest rates are going up faster than in our country's monetary history. Even the former Finance Minister, Liberal, John Manley, said that interest rates are going up because of the deficits. This prevents people from building houses and buying them. Will he finally eliminate inflationary deficits that make interest rates go up and keep his promise to balance the budget? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, actions count more than words, and we've taken action. We are building thousands of housing units in London, and we are reducing red tape. We are encouraging cities like Calgary to put forward more ambitious proposals, and we are ensuring that affordable apartments are built throughout the country by eliminating GST on their construction. And if food CEOs don't make your groceries more affordable, we will do so. This is what Canadians are calling for today, and that is what we are doing to build an economy that works for everybody. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, after the summer that these Liberals have had, even the Prime Minister must admit that he's not worth the cost. 8 years after he promised to make housing more affordable, he doubled the cost, doubled the rent, doubled mortgage payments, doubled the needed down payment. Then he said housing is not his job. And then he panicked when he plummeted in the polls and recycled promises that he'd broken 6 years earlier. Mr. Speaker, it took him 8 years to cause this housing hell. How long will it take to fix it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we said we'd work with municipalities to get housing built faster, and that's exactly what we're doing right across the country, including, for example, with the City of London, where we've got a deal done that fast-tracks the creation of over 2,000 additional housing units over the next 3 years, builds thousands more in the years to come. We're doing this by cutting red tape, fixing outdated zoning policies, and building more homes faster. This is our first deal, but I promise, not the last.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, he's building bureaucracy, not building homes. In fact, his inflationary deficits drive up interest rates, according to former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley. And that ensures that it's harder not only to buy homes, but to build them. Today we got the devastating news that not only are we not increasing home building was down in August, 18 months after his so-called accelerator was brought into place. So when will the Prime Minister realize that he's not worth the cost, get out of the way, and build homes, not bureaucracy?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the opposition leaders bickering won't help get houses built. Our plan does. The Minister of Housing wrote the Mayor of Calgary offering to partner with the city if they made necessary changes for more affordable housing. And just this Saturday, the City of Calgary approved a plan for reducing zoning red tape and building housing by public transit. This is a step in the right direction, and we know together we can build more apartments for students to rent and more homes for families to grow in.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, all he has delivered is an economy that built fewer homes last year than were built in 1972.
Wow.
And this year, housing construction is expected to drop further by 32%. Data from August showed that home building was down again. His inflationary deficits drive up interest rates, which make it harder for builders to finance their construction and harder for Canadians to afford a mortgage. So what will he finally do what he promised to do 8 years ago, and that is balance the budget to bring down interest rates and inflation?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We're focused on delivering real results, while the leader opposite is focused on empty slogans and picking fights. In fact, when he was in charge of housing, he bungled projects like the Toronto Line 1 extension, which to this day has no housing near a number of its stations. In contrast, we are actually linking public transit dollars to apartments and housing density, and we're doing so without the Conservative plan to restrict access to abortion, to deny the impact of climate change, and put more assault weapons in our streets.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie.
Okay. I just want to remind the honourable members, the ones who used to sit way down there and now are over here, I can see you now as well as hear you. The honourable member, l'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, in the midst of the housing crisis, Quebecers want politicians to find solutions. But to date, politicians in Ottawa aren't finding solutions. They're finding scapegoats. They blame our cities in Quebec for their failures in Ottawa. But municipalities have pointed out that the federal government is withholding $900 million earmarked for housing during a housing crisis. Ottawa is depriving Quebec of $900 million and has been doing so for 6 months. Mr. Speaker, it's not a time for squabbling. It's a time for building. It's time to be responsible. Will the government immediately release our $900 million? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are there to build in partnership with the provinces and municipalities. We're there to build more housing. That's why we created a $4 billion plan to accelerate densification, improve zoning, and help municipalities deliver more housing more quickly. We've also eliminated the GST on building new apartments because we know that we need to increase supply. We will continue to be there to work hand in hand with the provinces, with municipalities, because it's by all working together that we will address this housing crisis. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, if housing is their priority, then they should free up the $900 million we're entitled to for housing construction. It doesn't get much more obvious than that. And yet the Liberals are doing the opposite. They're withholding the $900 million for housing. The message this sends to Quebecers who are having a hard time affording decent housing is that they're not the priority. They take second place to jurisdictional squabbles. Mr. Speaker, that's not responsible. That's not what Quebecers expect from the federal government. So when are the $900 million for housing going to be paid? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we know full well that the Bloc is here for squabbling. We are here to work hand in hand with the provinces, with municipalities. That's why we've set up a $4 billion plan to work directly with municipalities to increase supply in housing, to build more densification, to improve zoning, to accelerate construction of new housing. We've also removed the GST from construction costs for new apartments because we know how much we need to increase supply. That's part of the actions we've taken for a long time that we will continue to take to help people throughout the country. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
20 months, Canadians have been dealing with high grocery bills, and neither the leader of the opposition nor the Prime Minister have the courage to mention the true culprit, the corporate greed, which is driving up prices. In fact, when they had the chance to publicly show up and hold these CEOs to account, neither of them even bothered to show up. The leader of the opposition even gave tax breaks to the wealthy CEOs. When will the Prime Minister stop the delay and the disappointment? When will this government step up and force these CEOs to finally lower their prices?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our focus is on making life more affordable and ensuring corporations pay their fair share. The Minister of Innovation met today with the CEOs of the large grocery chains to reinforce the immediate need to stabilize food prices and improve competition. Indeed, we're introducing changes to competition here in Canada to address the rise in food prices, amongst others. We will, every day, Mr. Speaker, continue to build an economy that works for all Canadians.
Well, member for Burnaby South.
Under the Liberals and the Conservatives, Canada has lost 1 million affordable housing units, and it's been 5 months that construction has been going down. Eliminating GST on the construction of affordable housing is important, but it's 8 years too late. It will take a lot more. When will the Prime Minister stop delaying and announce that the federal government is starting once again to build affordable housing? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our goal is to make people's lives more affordable and to ensure that corporations pay their fair share. The Minister of Innovation met with food CEOs this morning to insist on the need to stabilize the price of food and increase competition. We are making changes to the rules on competition in Canada to fight the rise in food prices, among other. We will continue to build an economy that works for all Canadians every day.
Le chef de l'opposition.
The NDP has now been in government for almost 2 years, during which time, by their own admission, both grocery prices and grocery profits have gone up. That's the result they get. And now they're supporting the Prime Minister's plan for a carbon tax that will rise to 61 cents a litre on the farmers who make the food and the truckers who ship the food. Their response to all this is to hold a big photo op today. The Prime Minister claims food will be affordable by Thanksgiving. So, we'll, by Thanksgiving, lettuce be back down from its 94% increase because of today's meeting.
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
I'd like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. But coming from someone who advocated for crypto as an advice to Canadians, I think Canadians watching at home understand not to follow his advice when it comes to grocery, Mr. Speaker. The answer of Canadians is thanks but no thanks, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to do the tough work on this side and fight for Canadians at every step of the way.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
It's not just one carbon tax, there's a second carbon tax that the Prime Minister wants to impose on the backs of Quebecers. Yes, it applies to Quebecers, to farmers, to truckers in Quebec who deliver our food. And the Bloc supports it and wants to increase it radically, as they've said. This will inflate the price of food. Will the Prime Minister heed the call of the Bloc to radically increase the carbon tax on the backs of Quebecers? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As it's my first opportunity to speak during the session, I'd like to offer my sincerest condolences to all Canadians and people who were affected by forest fires, the tens of thousands of people who were evacuated due to forest fires, to flooding. And thankfully, Tropical Storm Lee didn't hit as hard as it could have. At a time of climate change, a responsible government has to invest in climate change. And it also needs to support Canadians during these difficult times. That's exactly what we're doing on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. The Liberal Bloc carbon tax has radically increased the price of food. Carrots alone have gone up 74%. My mother always told me to eat carrots. They're good for your eyes. I invite the Bloc leader to eat more of them because he doesn't see the costs of his support for the Liberal Bloc carbon tax. The Prime Minister and his coalition with the Bloc are not worth the cost, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister's big meeting with the food CEOs at least cancel the 74% increase for carrots by Thanksgiving? Yes or no? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, with the forest fire season we've had, the heat waves that have been throughout Canada and around the country, around the world, some people might say that there are bigger challenges than carrots. We need to fight climate change. We need to help people during these difficult times. That's exactly what we're doing here on this side of the House. What is the Conservative Party proposing? Nothing to fight climate change. They want pollution to be free. Mr. Speaker, that's not a responsible position for a party that wants to form government. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. We want groceries to cost less for everyone, Mr. Speaker. The carbon tax 2.0 that the Liberals are imposing on Canadians, contrary to what the Bloc Québécois claims, also applies to Quebec. On June 5th, a motion was presented in this House that the House recognizes that the first carbon tax is a failure and calls on the government to immediately cancel the second tax, the Clean Fuel Regulations. And what do you know? The Bloc voted against it. Even worse, a Bloc MP called for a radical increase. Will the Prime Minister reject the Bloc's call to radically increase the carbon tax at the expense of Quebecers?